Hey Ramesh, how are you?
Just great. How are you doing?
Good. So we should probably introduce ourselves.
I suppose so. I am Ramesh Ponnuru, a senior editor at National Review.
And I'm Michelle Goldberg, a senior writer for Newsweek and the Daily Beast.
Awesome. So we wanted to talk a little bit about Donald Trump and his supposedly serious exploration of a presidential run.
You know, it's one of those things that I know that nobody kind of wants to take it seriously, but why do you think, I mean, to me, the fact that he's polling so well among, likely Republican voters, it kind of it seems to be an incredibly damning indictment of the Republican field as opposed to a statement of kind of anything about him. But it seems to me that most kind of serious conservatives or even not so serious conservatives are not that pleased about his sudden prominence. Is that right?
I think really in the last couple days you can see a little bit of almost a little bit of a pile-on from conservatives about Trump. Partly just because he's the new guy, and so everybody's talking about him. That most political observers would tell you you're exactly right. It is a damning indictment of the rest of the Republican field. I'm not quite as convinced of that line of thinking. I think look, he's incredibly well known. He's much better known than Mitch Daniels or Tim
but
Pawlenty.
He's incredibly well known as a kind of buffoonish reality TV character, and
well, look, somebody watches it, right?
And thrice married developer. And thrice married, kind of thrice married to increasingly progressively younger wives, right? He's not known for anything.
Yeah. But look, he's not going to be the Republican nominee.
No,
I have as much of a shot at being the nominee as he does.
He's not going to be the nominee, obviously, or at least I would, put money on it. But it is, the thing that I find kind of fascinating is that he has come so far as he has come, it seems that he's really ridden the kind of birther train to his current prominence. And it seems to me that Republicans have a dilemma in the whole birther situation, because on the one hand, these polls have recently come out from public policy polling showing that a significant part of the Republican base don't believe that Obama was born in this country and believe that should be a major issue in the campaign. There was something like a quarter who said they wouldn't vote for somebody who didn't make the birth certificate an issue. But at the same time, for everybody kind of outside of the, outside of the bubble of the far right, the birther stuff seems crazy. And it seems like Republican elites realize that, which is why everybody seems to be running away from it. People, when you have kind of Bill O'Reilly and, Ann Coulter and all these people trying to shut this line of inquiry, so to speak, down,
well, and
it seems like people are really
Arizona.
nervous about this and want it to go away.
Yeah, well, I think, and even in some odd way, at least, who knows what the next statement's going to be, but Michelle Bachmann sort of seemed to flirt with it and then seemed to say, well, it's a settled question. I think this is something that excites a portion of the Republican base, but that almost all Republicans understand is not something that most people are willing to entertain, or that most people think is at all sensible, and so they're running away from it. I think this is what, I forget who it is whose phrase this is, but I think it's a very useful one. The idea of sort of symbolic belief that that people profess things whether or not they think they're literally true, because it's a way of getting to something else that they really do deeply believe. In this case, being just like, I hate Obama. I'm really against Obama.
Right,
I
or
hate
they
him
feel
even
like
more than
Obama
you
is
do.
somehow
And
illegitimate.
Donald Trump, I think, is what he's doing very, very successfully is telling this audience, you know what? I hate him too. And that's what they're hungering for, right? I mean, this portion of the base really, they like, I think, the fact that this is like a celebrity. He's got a reputation for being a tough guy, and he's against Obama, and he's willing to take him on. Now, of course, you and I know he's not taking him on in any way that's actually going to do any real political damage to Obama because he's a buffoon. But that's the subsection of the Republican electorate that he's appealing to right now. But that's the ceiling, I think.
The subsection of the Republican electorate that seems kind of desperate for far-right buffoonery isn't really that much of a subsection, right? It's a plurality. I mean, if you look at, if you add up the votes for, if you add up kind of, where Trump is polling and add to that where people like Michelle Bachmann are polling, I mean, I guess, does it make you nervous? It would make, to me, it seems kind of analogous to maybe where the Democratic Party was in the late 60s and the early 70s, where you had these, kind of very confident left-wing insurgents convinced that if they could only kind of seize the nomination, the rest of the country would go along for the ride. And, it being disastrous. Is that something that conservatives are worried about? I mean, because from where I sit, it just seems like these are the Republican base has become so extreme and so divorced from reality, even if, as you say, these are kind of symbolic beliefs rather than, kind of actually deeply held beliefs. Nevertheless, they seem beliefs that these are beliefs that they seem to really want people to kind of cater to and affirm.
Yeah, absolutely there are conservatives who are worried about this. I'm not really especially one of them. I just think, look, if you think back to the moment in 1995 politically, where you had, this conservative insurgency, it's successful, it's taken the Congress, there's a lot of confidence, a lot of overconfidence. You've got, Newt Gingrich as the leading figure, and you've got this real swing to the right of the Republican Party. And who does the party end up nominating for president? Bob Dole, who's really not associated with any of those things. I just think at the end of the day, the Republican primary electorate is not going to go for somebody who mouths this kind of stuff, that there is going to be fundamentally the desire to get rid of Obama will cause the party to move in a more pragmatic direction in the primaries. And that, I think, is something that there is a great deal of history behind.
I guess,
this is the season when people are indulging in their silliest instincts, and that gets worn down during the primary process.
But there's a couple of differences, right? There's nobody who's kind of as clearly next in line as Bob Dole was. I mean, maybe Mitt Romney, but even, there's still not quite the same sense of kind of it being, clearly his turn. But then the other thing is that the Republican Party electorate of today is not the electorate of 15 years ago. People who used to consider themselves moderate Republicans are probably not in the party anymore, right? I mean, even aside from, the recent victory of people like Scott Brown, the old Rockefeller Republicans don't really exist. It's a much more conservative party than it was even during the time of Newt Gingrich.
Well, yeah, you're going to have a conservative nominee, almost certainly. But that nominee is far more likely to be somebody like Romney or Tim Pawlenty or Mitch Daniels than somebody who is trying to suggest that Obama was born in Kenya or something like that. I mean, look, they are going to have political views that a lot of people consider too conservative, but that they're not going to be views that I consider too conservative, and they're not going to be views that that a mainstream conservative would find crazy.
Do you think that Romney has a chance?
Well, if McCain could pull it out in 2008, I suppose you've got to say that he's got a chance, and he's doing well in the polls, and even I have a weakness for looking at the in-trade futures markets, and they still have him as a weak front runner. I don't think in the end he's going to be the nominee, and I do think that that he's really in a box because he's got the combination of a healthcare plan that is very similar to one that is like one of the top issues for Republicans to be against. And he's got this record of flip-flopping that makes it impossible for him to repudiate that plan. I don't think that there's any solution to that problem.
Don't you think the Mormon thing is a big deal too?
The Mormon thing?
Don't you think that
No, I don't actually. I think that's been overplayed. I think that the politics of religion in the Republican presidential primaries, and forgive me because I think I've gone on about this in previous blogging hits, but I think there is a problem if you try to run as the movement conservative candidate who has the sort of the hardcore economic conservatives, Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, combined with the social conservatives, and you try to be that guy. It's very hard to do that in the Republican presidential primaries. You think that you've mathematically got the coalition, but the politics of religion will trip you up because either you are an evangelical candidate who's running on evangelicalism and there's just not quite enough juice there to get you to the nomination, or you're a non-evangelical candidate like Romney, and enough of your evangelicals who should be part of that coalition, if it's going to work, end up defecting and going over to some actual evangelical like Mike Huckabee. So you can't be the nominee.
But the problem isn't just that he's not evangelical. It's that there is kind of a profound and intense suspicion of the Mormon Church that is, going to be especially strong, I would guess, in early primary states like Iowa and South Carolina. I mean, how does... people have a lot of suspicion about the Mormon Church, and it's interesting. I did a piece recently about Fred Karger. Do you know
the name's familiar, but
he's running as, it's it's a bit of a stunt. He's like a former Republican Oppo research guy who is now, turned gay rights activist, who's now running, and raising like significant money and has an Iowa field director, a New Hampshire field director, and is really running with the goal of getting into at least some of the debates. Mm-hmm. That seems to be his big thing. And I think he has this idea, which I don't think is totally crazy, that if he can get into these debates and really challenge Romney on the Mormon Church's role in fighting the Mormon Church's role in anti-gay marriage initiatives in places like California and Maine and other states, that although the social conservatives are not going to object to the LDS's stance on gay marriage, that just the kind of constant reminder of how the LDS Church works and its kind of hierarchical methods of mobilization are going to freak people out. It's a kind of oblique and weird and cynical strategy, but I don't think it's totally crazy.
Well, look, I think that I don't want to dismiss the possibility that Mormonism could be a political liability, both in the primaries and I would also say in the general election. I think that some of the sort of things you're talking about would be a problem in the general election too, because it's not just evangelicals, it's not just conservative Republicans who are uncomfortable with the Mormon Church or with aspects of the Mormon Church. But I don't think that it is his fundamental problem, nor do I think it is an insurmountable obstacle. I think that if he'd had a slightly different political history and it was running a different strategy in 2008, he could have been the nominee. And I would say the same thing now, notwithstanding the Mormonism. Look, if you look at how he won in Nevada and Utah, would I ascribe that to anti-evangelicalism, anti-Catholicism, anti-everything but Mormonism in the Republican electorates of Utah and Nevada? No, I would ascribe it to Mormons voting for their fellow Mormons.
Really? You're going to...
And in Iowa, I think...
You're not actually going to argue that his victory in Utah and Nevada has nothing to do with religion?
Sorry, what?
You're not really going to argue that his victory in Utah and Nevada...
No, my point is, it's Mormons voting for a fellow Mormon in those cases. And I think in Iowa, what happened last time was much more a plurality of evangelicals, not a majority, plurality, voting for a fellow evangelical rather than voting against a Mormon. And I think that's something that all voting blocs tend to do, and it's just an inescapable feature of politics.
How do you feel? the Democratic field, will tend to have a couple of sideshow candidates in most elections, but I can't remember an election when it had as many as it looks like you guys are going to have. How do you feel about the fact that Michelle Bachmann seems to be surging?
I don't think that she'd be a great candidate, and I don't think she will be the nominee. I think, the question I have for people in this sort of, who are making this kind of campaign is, either they've got to be self-deluded enough to think they could actually win, or they have to be just exploiting their followers because they know they can't win, but they're going to build up their national fundraising base, get themselves some attention, and so on and so forth, in which case it seems like very distastefully exploitative. And I'm not really sure with her which one that is.
But then there's also a third possibility. Mm-hmm. There's also a third possibility, which is that they think they're setting themselves up to be a vice president.
Yeah, well, that is maybe a little bit less delusional, but still pretty delusional, I think.
Well, it's not delusional from where Michelle Bachmann sits, right? Like, if Sarah Palin can do it, why can't she?
Well, because Sarah Palin in the summer of 2008 was not anything like Michelle Bachmann in her profile right now, right?
No, of course you're right, but from her point of view, I doubt that she sees Sarah Palin as a kind of.
I have the same question about Senator Santorum, for that matter. I mean, he can't really think he's going to be president, but at the same time, what does he think he's going to accomplish if he's not going to be the nominee?
Why don't you think he thinks he really? I think they both think that they could really be president. I mean, I think that part of it, in Michelle Bachmann's case, I think part of it comes from the conservative movement's serial derision and underestimation of President Obama. Because they have such contempt for him, and they see him as being not nearly as intelligent as he is. It makes them think, well, he can do it. Why can't I? If he can, if a one-term senator can be, can win the White House, then why not a however many term congressperson? And it's, I think that the movement has been a victim of its own propaganda with regards to how it sees Obama.
I'm sorry, go on.
I was going to say, you see this even in, some of the other kind of crazy conspiracy theories about who really wrote Dreams.
Dreams from My Father.
Dreams from My Father.
I'm not, first of all.
That it couldn't have been Obama, because how could he have written something that was so kind of, eloquent and intelligent?
I'm not sure that I accept the premise that there's some sort of unusually large number of vanity or no hope or crazy candidates in the Republican field right now. I mean, if you think back to the Carol Moseley Brauns, Mike Gravels, Al Sharptons in the past, there are always these sorts of candidacies. So I'm not sure there's all that much more.
Okay, but let's add them up.
Well, of course, I don't remember all
right?
of them because, they're yeah.
Okay, but let's just, so you're taught, you would put Rick Santorum in this category.
Yeah. I put Gary Bauer and Steve Forbes' 2000 campaign.
Michelle Bachmann.
Pat Robertson, Jesse Jackson.
Well, Roy Moore, clearly, is, talking about this time. Okay. We're talking, so we've got Michelle Bachmann, Judge Roy Moore, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, Donald Trump.
I wouldn't put Newt quite in that category, actually. No, I wouldn't. No, I
think Newt Gingrich.
I can see why you'd put him in that category, but I think there's enough of a history of actual accomplishment there in the political field that he's a more complicated story of somebody who has who sort of had a more mainstream political persona and then has just decided to sort of play in this sort of other field, right? I mean.
And by other field, you mean
if Newt had not been carrying on, if he hadn't sort of plugged the Dinesh D'Souza book about what's the name of that book? The one about Obama being sort of motivated purely by anti-colonialism.
About him being a Kenyan anti-colonialist, which is
but
also
people would be taking you.
And maybe just as a digression, you can tell me when anti-colonialism.
Well, you can. It's funny. It's pathetic. I don't remember the title of that book since I've got a review of it in the new Claremont Review of Books. I guess it just went out of my mind as soon as I'd finished the review. But it's not a friendly review. If Newt hadn't done that, hadn't taken the position that he took during the allegedly 9/11 mosque controversy, he would still be taken about as seriously as he's taken seriously now as a candidate. Actually, he'd probably be taken a little bit more seriously, just as somebody with a fundraising base, somebody who was the speaker, has been involved in national politics. I think this stuff is actually...
Yeah, but he hasn't been involved. I mean, but he spent the last few years, talking up, basically whipping up hysteria about kind of the coming... I mean, the Muslim stuff aside, he's also, refashioned himself into a kind of hardcore culture warrior. He made that documentary, Rediscovering God in America. He, it's a transformation that, kind of would look bad on anyone, but looks especially bad for somebody with his, kind of... Like,
personal history, for one thing.
Despicable personal morality.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, even under those better circumstances...
Wait, so can I ask you a question? Why do you see him as more serious than Rick Santorum? Just because of that Santorum has become a synonym for, like, a particularly disgusting sexual byproduct?
No, because, well, for one thing, because Santorum's never, ever been anywhere in the polls, and because Santorum lost a race as an incumbent senator by 18 points, which is something that actually happens quite rarely, has no national, recognition or base. I mean, I just think, look, at the end of the day, under any circumstances, Gingrich was not likely to be the nominee, but he would have been treated, he would have been put in the top tier or the second tier, regardless of whether he'd done any of the sort of crazier stuff that he's done over the last 2 years. I mean, don't you think that's true? I mean, if he had won in 2000, for example, and there was some talk about 2000, there was some talk about 2008 and so forth, people would have taken him somewhat seriously.
But that was a long time ago. I mean, he's been out of politics.
Yeah.
He left politics in disgrace and has been out of politics since then, and all of the news that has come out about him in the interim has been starkly negative.
Yeah, look, he didn't leave politics in disgrace, actually, though. I mean, right? I mean, he left in '98 because he didn't have the votes to stay as...
Okay, not disgrace and failure.
But, he would say, look, we got the budget down.
So his record is first failure and then the disgrace came later.
Well, not to be by any means a Gingrich apologist. I'm not happy with pretty much anything he's done for the last several years. But, I think you could actually tell a reasonable story about 1995 to 1999 in which Gingrich is not some kind of miserable failure, but actually accomplishes quite a bit. And, the Bush administration was not nervous about appointing him to positions and, taking his counsel and so on and so forth. I mean, that's just not, up until the last 2 years... His image has not been, certainly in the Republican Party, as somebody who is sort of a disgraced kind of pariah type. But I'm sorry.
Well, the narrative was that he kind of won this spectacular midterm victory, had this large majority, was able to do a couple of things, then utterly squandered it with his kind of personal petulance and vanity, handed Bill Clinton re-election, and then left the House because he was unable to maintain his speaker.
Well, I mean, I think I think most people would recognize that the petulance and vanity were serious problems and did contribute to his extremely low popularity in national opinion polls in the mid to late 90s. But as for giving the presidency to Clinton, Clinton was going to win that race. 1996 was a very, very good year to be running as an incumbent president. And, the things, having accomplished a few things, in some ways it was a very productive time. You had not only the move to surpluses, which at least coincides with his speakership. You've got the welfare reform. You've got the first year-on-year spending cuts since the late 60s. Since the early 80s, because you had that 1 year, 81, 82. Look, for Republicans, it actually seems like, particularly in comparison to what comes later, a fairly productive time. But the parallel, that we sort of have brought up now a couple times here with 95, 96, I think is interesting in light of the fact that we've got this kind of budget debate going on at the same time as the presidential campaign is beginning to get underway, which is something you also had in 1995, 96. And I wonder whether you have any thoughts on how that debate is playing out.
Well, actually, I do.
Sure.
I have a question about how serious you think it's interesting because often when I am talking about the right, to my fellow liberals tend to be convinced that kind of everything, that all of these right-wing ideological movements are just being kind of created and manipulated by Wall Street and big business. And one of the ways I think in which we can see that that's not necessarily true is that the Tea Party wing of the country seems to be perfectly happy to have the United States default on its debt by refusing to raise the debt limit. And again, it seems that although, some kind of more sophisticated Republicans see this as just, kind of a game of chicken, that nobody's really gonna fail to raise the debt limit, but let's just see how much we can extract with the threat of doing it, at least at the grassroots. I mean, refusing to do this is a major demand of the Tea Party. It's, kind of a major theme of a lot of, right-wing media. Does this scare you?
Well, I am concerned, absolutely, about the possibility that we have, a default or I think of it as kind of, we had the debate over the government shutdown, and now we're having a debate over the credit market shutdown. I don't know. I don't think that the Tea Partiers. I think the Tea Partiers are split. I think that there is a sizable part of the Tea Party movement that is just not willing to increase the debt limit under any circumstances. And I think there are going to be a significant number of Republican politicians who don't vote for it at all.
And it seems like, to a certain extent, like they're like Republicans are lying to them. I mean, they seem to be lying to them about the consequences, about the idea that this is something that kind of a responsible political party could do. And they also seem to be lying to them about this kind of idea, well, this is a way to force the government to live within its means, when that's not really the case. It's not kind of like if I don't kind of get if I can't kind of raise the limit on my credit card, it means that I can't go out to dinner. It's a lot more complicated than that. But this kind of,
but it is a way.
First of all,
right?
analogizing. What's that?
It is a way to force spending restraint. Right? That's the other faction of the Tea Parties. They are going to hold out for some serious concessions from the White House in order to pass this thing, and I think they've got a reasonable chance of getting one.
Concessions is one thing. Concessions is one thing, but the idea that the government's going to have to institute cuts because it can't borrow any more money is quite another thing. Saying that we're going to demand concessions in exchange for raising the debt limit, that's a way to get concessions. But it's not as if we can't raise the debt limit, then all of a sudden we're going to start making all these cuts and kind of living within our quote-unquote means. That's not what's going to happen.
The message you're describing as a lie is not, I think, the message that's coming out of Boehner or Cantor or Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell. And I think the people who are saying this are people who genuinely believe it. Right? I think I can think of some people in Congress.
So I guess it's not a lie if you believe your own
Bachman's probably in that camp, for example. And I have no reason to doubt that she is sincere in this view. But I agree with you that it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah, well, and the dishonesty versus stupidity debate is often a hard one.
I guess one of the great mysteries maybe you can shed some light on this. I'm not 100% sure what the point of this Obama commission on the deficit is, this new one that he talked about last week and the people have started being named to since, there was the Bull-Simpson Commission, which was a presidential commission. Obama's had his own budget in January, and then this sort of not quite a budget thing he did last week. So I'm not really sure what the point of it. My only guess is the point of it is to be able to say as the debt limit debate heats up and gets closer to the deadline, well, look, we're working on some sort of deal, but time's up, so let's get this debt limit passed, and then we'll just continue working. But let's not short-circuit things while we've got progress going on. In which case, I think it might be a sensible strategy on his part. But is there something I'm missing here?
No, I think that's probably. I mean, I think that's probably correct. I mean, I think it's really unfortunate that the president has kind of so given into right-wing, has kind of so accepted right-wing rhetoric about the urgency of the federal debt. I mean, it's amazing to me kind of how quickly and suddenly everybody has decided that this is such a kind of pressing priority after it being, a matter of almost no concern whatsoever during the last administration. And, and given the fact that we're in the middle of, or not in the middle, we're, kind of trudging very slowly out of a recession, given the kind of manifest failure of supply side economics, and given the fact that kind of austerity measures are such a, kind of economic catastrophe might not be the right word, but they're certainly not working in Britain. I mean, it's unfortunate to me that he seems to have kind of given in and saying that cutting the deficit is that the only question is kind of how we do it, but that we all have to. Well,
I actually agree with that more than you might think. In that it is, the fact is the public still thinks jobs is a more important issue than the deficit, which isn't to say that people aren't concerned about the deficit, but jobs and economic recovery, economic growth is still higher on people's minds. I do think it's sort of amazing that that the issue of the unemployed has had so little political salience. I've always sort of thought that unemployment was overrated as a political indicator, on the theory that actually most people have jobs, and although they're concerned about people who are unemployed, they don't quite vote on that there are other things like personal income, overall growth that matter more in terms of making that connection between the economy and political results. And now I think we're really seeing a demonstration of the fact that is true, but it's sort of deeply unfortunate, because this is a real social catastrophe that is unfolding in terms of persistent long-term joblessness.
Do we know if that's true? We don't know if that. Do we know if that's true? I mean, it certainly might have been true in the midterms, but midterms in general, right? More affluent and kind of engaged people tend to vote in the midterms.
Well,
I don't think we have any indication yet. And the other thing is that people who are unemployed, kind of don't see solutions from either party. It's very telling that the Republicans, one of their major issues in the primary, in the midterms, was basically, Obama's going to take away your Medicare.
I wonder if part of the,
they weren't running on kind of privatizing
that could become a serious
and
problem.
doing, kind of massive reductions in social services.
That could be a serious problem for the Republicans. I wonder if some of the pivot to deficit reduction from Obama, the pivot that you're sort of decrying, is based on the fact that he wants to be able to say that we've got a recovery underway. And so, it's just hard to make the case we need more jobs measures while at the same time making the case we need to stay the course. I've already done such a great job. Now, granted, he understands it's a weak recovery, and he does mention that. And he doesn't want to, he doesn't want cutbacks that'll weaken that recovery. But I think that is a fundamental tension that helps explain some of the reasons that progressives are unhappy with the economic posture of this administration.
I don't think it's that he wants to, basically, because that actually would, I think, rub people really the wrong way. If he was basically saying, we're on the upsurge, it's time to kind of worry about other things.
No, he's not, certainly not explicitly saying.
I mean, that would be, but even if he was implying it, that would be kind of even more galling than just kind of this implicit shift. I think it's more just that he, and it might even be kind of strategically effective that he, wants to kind of, I think probably it's politically useful for him to set up a contrast between his reasonable version of debt reduction and the crazy Ryan plan. And so I think in certain ways it's politically smart, at least on a kind of tactical level for this particular battle, but it does still mean that the whole debate kind of takes a bunch of starts from a bunch of Republican premises.
Yeah, it's not the people's budget. The House Progressive Caucus is not really a part of the debate, because the Ryan and Obama revised plans are the polls.
Well, we're both
of this
basically
debate.
agreeing about how much needs to be cut.
I'm sorry, what?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
They're both basically saying we're going to cut the same amount. The debate now is just how we do it.
I wonder what you make of the Standard & Poor, warning that it might downgrade the status of U.S. federal government debt on this debate and how it's going to play out.
The Standard, it's not as if the Standard & Poor agency is kind of completely outside of politics, right? Isn't this, at least to a certain extent, kind of Wall Street throwing its weight around?
No, I'm sure it is. Especially when you think about the fingers that have been pointed at these agencies over their role in the economic crisis. The thing, I think they partly just, they want there to be some kind of progress in deficit reduction, but I don't think that they understand how much they have actually, in my view, they have actually set back the prospects for debt limit extension, because what they
really,
I think that they have encouraged both the Democrats and the Republicans to think that they have more leverage than they do, right? The Republican reaction to that announcement was, this is why we've really got to get control of the debt and cut spending. And the Democratic reaction was, this is why we've really got to pass this debt ceiling increase, because, there are serious consequences for credit markets as a result. When both sides think they've been strengthened, it just makes it, I think, less likely that they're going to come to a deal.
But do you
think,
I guess I just assumed that the Republican posture on the debt ceiling was a bluff, because presumably the Republican Party does not want to, deal a devastating blow to the American financial sector.
Some people are bluffing.
I've got to imagine that.
Some people are bluffing and some people aren't. This is going to be a very hard thing for the House Republican leaders to round up votes for, right? It is going to be a real uphill climb for them to get backbenchers.
I guess, but if that happens, at what point does the conservative movement or the Republican Party, kind of think about the Frankenstein monster that they've created? If you're saying that kind of the members of your own party will not vote for something that is kind of, manifestly in the national interest, and that, I think kind of most Republicans, or at least, savvy Republicans, realize is manifestly, not just in the national interest, but as an absolute imperative.
It was an imperative.
You've created a movement
that's kind of several years ago, too, when most Democrats didn't vote for it, including Obama, including Harry Reid. It's just...
and I think that's too bad, because that was a bit of posturing that's now going to allow, that's now going to be kind of used as a diversion. But I think the point is that was just posturing, right? There was never a question that they weren't going to do it.
Well, they didn't in the end vote for it. Is all I'm saying, right? And look, at the end,
no, I know,
I think the most likely,
and I think that's really unfortunate, because now it kind of gives cover to, but what I was saying is that I assumed that the Republicans were posturing in the same way. You're saying, no, you don't think that they're going to. You think that they would really let the United States
Some of them are, some of them aren't. I think the most likely outcome is you've got an 11th hour deal where these Democrats in the Senate and Republicans in the House have to carry the load of passing the thing, and the minority party in each chamber takes a walk on it. I just think that has been the historical.
Right. But that's a really interesting thing for. What is the Republic? That's a very interesting shift for the Republican Party, right? If instead of kind of voting in this party in this, as a partisan bloc, if you basically need, if you find John Boehner needing to rely on a substantial block of Democrats, that really doesn't that. I mean, that seems to really shift the dynamic, and also it seems like it will really alienate a lot of these Tea Party Republicans.
But the thing is, it's not just the Tea Partiers. I mean, the thing that colors the entire debate is that raising the debt limit's unpopular with the public at large, right? I mean, these folks, if Boehner has the votes, or if Reid has the votes in the Senate and the House to pass a debt ceiling increase, every other person whose votes they don't need, particularly who's vulnerable in the next election cycle, is going to be given a pass to vote no on it, because they don't want to face on either side the ads with the guys, with the opponents saying, this guy, he's been in Washington, and what's he been doing? He's been increasing the debt limit, increasing the credit limit for these irresponsible people in Washington. That's just not the ad that they want. And everybody involved in politics has seen those ads used on both sides over the years.
I know, it's so unfortunate one of the things that liberals really hoped for, I think, with the Obama election was that, maybe it would inaugurate an era of politicians kind of not treating voters like idiot children, and clearly that hasn't come to pass. So that, at a certain point, the kind of the profound cynicism and the kind of profound banking on voters' ignorance, it's leading us towards catastrophe.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, and maybe with that note of despairing agreement, we should call it a day.
Yeah, that sounds good. But okay. So, thanks so much.
Always good talking to you.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.